Good evening, everyone. This is an easy crowd. I just stood up and everybody stopped talking. Usually in our classrooms, we have to do a little more interventionist stuff to get our students to sort of stop talking, to close their laptops, where they're doing their email usually, I think, and to pay attention. But my name is Ernest Wilson, and I'm the Dean of the Annenberg School for Communications. Thank you. Thank you. It's a delight to see some familiar faces. Patricia, it's good to see you again this year. And a number of you I had the privilege of seeing last year. And so welcome back to the Annenberg School for Communication, to what is really one of our best events. We have wonderful discussions, great presentations, tough questioning, and everyone is able to go back with value added that we guarantee will double the revenue of your firm or your money back. We are delighted to sponsor this event as we've done in the past. The first thing I really want to do is thank my mentor and strategic public relations advisor in this entire episode and activity, which is Jerry Swirling. So Jerry would stand up and... We would also like to recognize the Los Angeles chapter of the Public Relations Society of America, who has partnered with us annually to support this event. And so if we have our representative stand from that. Thank you. I was looking right at you. Thank you. Good to see you again. And I want to thank this year's Symposium lead sponsors, and they include Amgen, Korn Ferry International, Kahn & Wolf, Hyundai Motor America, Union Bank of California, Weber Shandwick, and supporting sponsor, Payne PR. So I want to thank all of our sponsors. This annual symposium, which is, Patricia reminded me, is the 19th in this series. That's really quite something to have a tradition of 19 symposia like this. Is named in honor of the late beloved Dr. Smith, professor of journalism and public relations here, who helped solidify the public relations program at the university. He brought tremendous leadership to make it possible for us to have the kind of program that we have today. In 1973, the program became the first accredited public relations program on the West Coast, and we're very proud of that. And Professor Smith was president of the LA chapter of PRSA in 1977 and received the Outstanding Educator Award for his good work and leadership in 1979. He passed away in 1989, and his former students who had studied with him and who revered his memory and his contribution established this symposium as a living tribute to the work that he has done, both for them individually and also for the profession. Since this is a public relations group, let me do a little bit of public relations, if I may, strategic public relations. And I want to start off by saying that these kinds of activities are hugely important for the Annenberg School for Communication and our strategic public relations program. We hope that you gain something from it and that we contribute to the community of people who care deeply about this important subject. But it's also hugely important for us. It's important for our students. It's important for our faculty to remain engaged with the work that you are doing. And it also is an opportunity for us to pick your brains about what the future of this profession is going to be and how we should prepare our students to come and work more effectively for the firms that you represent here tonight. Here at the Annenberg School Public Relations Program, it has grown enormously. If I'm not mistaken, the first class, Jerry, had 5 students in it, 5 students. We now have almost 70 students in a very short period of time. We have been nominated for a number of awards in this area. I think one of our students is one of the finalists for the Public Relations Student of the Year. and she's here this evening. If she would stand up, please. And if any of you are voting, please. Thank you. Good luck. So it's like the Oscars, I guess. If any of you are voting, that's who you should vote for. And the program, I think, has been nominated as one of the very best public relations programs in the United States of America. And this all in a very short period of time, and the result of the work that our colleagues, Jen and Jerry are doing, and now Jay Wang has joined them, and doing a wonderful job here in the city of Los Angeles. Let me just say a few words in closing about the kinds of activities that we're engaged in. My personal favorite, I shouldn't pick favorites, but my personal favorite is TriStar. This is an organization of students who work in the public relations field, both graduate and undergraduate. We didn't do too badly last year. The Prime Minister of Great Britain singled us out as doing wonderful work. Our students did great work in working with the Consulate General here in Los Angeles to help raise awareness for the issue of education globally and especially in Africa. And so the Prime Minister of Great Britain singled us out as doing great work in that field. We also had reasonably good recognition in the area of public relations and public diplomacy when the Secretary of State, Condoleezza Rice, recognized the work that we're doing in public diplomacy and public relations with the highest award that the State Department offers, the Benjamin Franklin Award to citizens groups. Our Gaap Study, which I think many of you in the room know about, I've talked to several colleagues who have been using it professionally, has really become the industry standard in what is necessary and required in today's rapidly changing environment, both within the United States and globally. And these are just a few of the things that I could talk about if I was still wearing strictly my professorial hat rather than my bureaucratic dean hat. I would go on for the next 45 minutes. It's because professors tend to talk in 50-minute slots. It's hard not to do that otherwise. But I will restrain myself. But I could go on and on and on about the good work that we are doing here in public relations. But let me ask with a couple of questions. And I hope that a couple of the questions will make everybody in the room feel slightly uncomfortable at some point or another. These are what I call naive questions. Okay, sort of slightly impolite, not completely impolite, but slightly impolite. One is, I shouldn't start with this one because it's sort of, I may feel uncomfortable, but are our universities and schools doing enough to engage with practitioners so that we produce better theories, better practices, and better students who are brilliantly prepared for the work and the world they are about to enter? Are we doing our job? That's the first question. Secondly, is the leadership of the public relations community doing enough as individuals, as companies, and as a profession to analyze their own practices and tell their own story of the contributions that they are making to better understand and influence the world that we live in today? Is there a pipeline of leadership from entry level to senior level? And I know that one of our sponsors is very interested in leadership issues, so I know that's something that some of us are paying attention to. And then finally, perhaps most importantly for those of us, are there enough opportunities like this one this evening for leaders of both our communities and others to come together to talk about these hugely important issues? Now, I have been in this city for a year and a half. I consider myself still a novice, but to the last question, I want to say that the answer to that question is no, that there are not sufficient opportunities for those of us who are scholars and practitioners and thought leaders in this really important environment to come together to have these kinds of conversations. So what we plan to do at the Annenberg School for Communication is to consult with all of you in the room to find ways that we can enhance this kind of conversation so you can be better practitioners and we can be better scholars and teachers. Let me conclude then by saying it really is a delight and a pleasure to see all of you in the room. And it's now a privilege to turn the podium over to my predecessor, Jeff Cowan, who is the former dean, and is also university professor and Annenberg Family Chair in Communication Leadership. So I'd like to welcome to the forum my predecessor and good friend, Jeff Cowan.
As Ernie leaves for another event that he has to join, I want to emphasize that we've been friends for 15 years, and it really started when we both worked at the United States Information Agency, which of course is involved in issues of public relations for the United States government in part. And I was heading the Voice of America, and Ernie was in charge of planning for the USIA. And so I think that I felt strongly that PR is an important program, an important field of study, an important field to train people in for a great academic unit. And Ernie feels that way at least as strongly. And Ernie, we're very lucky to have you as the new dean. And I want to say personally what a privilege it is to be back here with so many friends who are here tonight. There's one person who wasn't introduced, or you haven't really met officially yet, who I get the privilege to introduce, besides the people on the panel, and that's Geneva Overholser. I don't know how many of you have really gotten to know Geneva, but she has brought, thanks to Ernie, she's brought to this school, as the director of the journalism school, tremendous dynamism and prestige, and you should all be aware of her. She had a great background as the editor of the Des Moines Register, as the ombudsman for the Washington Post, chairing and running any number of boards, including being the president of the Pulitzer Prize Board. She was a chaired professor at the University of Missouri, and she has brought to this school the kind of passion for public relations as well as for journalism that Ernie shares and that I share, and I want to make sure you all get to know her. Geneva, could you stand up and be recognized? So to start us off, I'm really pleased to introduce Rita Tatil, who really doesn't need any introduction to this group. I think she's known to you all as the founder and president of Celebrity Source, a member of any number of important boards, including the board of Los Angeles Visitors and Convention Bureau, and of course the president of Los Angeles chapter of the Public Relations Society of America. Please join me in welcoming Rita Tatil.
Thank you. Putting together an event like this doesn't just happen overnight and just snap your fingers and make a call. There's a lot that goes into it. In the last several months, there are two people that really put a lot of time and energy into making this evening happen, and I want to acknowledge them. You've already heard some acknowledgement for one. Jerry Swirling, without you, this event absolutely could not happen. Thank you so much. And working with Jerry, one of my board members, who is the immediate past chair of the Western District Conference of PRSA, and current board member, and we are in the midst of royalty because he is also the co-chair of PRSA's international conference that's going to be taking place in San Diego later this year. Please help me welcome and thank Dennis Walcott. Dennis, would you come up here for a second? Dennis is just going to tell you a little brief note here.
Shorter than an Oscar speech. My immediate past chair is the Western District. I want to at least tell both of you, both professionals and students, that we have a tremendous conference coming to Orange County on April 22nd through the 24th. It is the PRSA's Western District Conference, and in just a few short hours of time, you get, and for a very small amount of money, you get an incredible amount of programming and training and networking from professionals from 8 different Western states. And it's a tremendous opportunity. I'd encourage you to go down there in Newport Beach on April 22nd to the 24th. And for those students who are in the audience, if you're interested in volunteering, I'm sure that we can arrange a free pass for you to go there if you want to put in a few extra hours and beat those Cal State Fullerton students to the punch on this one. WesternDistrictConference.com is where you can get more information. So thank you.
Great. Thank you. And again, thank you for all your hard work on this, Dennis. It's during these tough economic times in particular, and times of job insecurity, that now more than ever before, I think we all need to step up our networking beyond our normal work opportunities. And one thing I want to say to those of you who are not members of PRSA, there's no better time than now to join this organization. In particularly now, we're all about providing value. And with that in mind, the national organization has decided to offer a special promotion for those of you who are new to PRSA. If you join the national organization now, you will get the first year of chapter membership in the Los Angeles chapter for free. Okay, so that's an $80 savings. And those in the know that, when times are tough, that's the time you need to step up and advance your networking to build more opportunities. And for those of you who are already members of PRSA LA, that's fantastic, and I want to tell you that the best way to be more effective in building your networking opportunities is to get involved on a committee. There are 22 active committees in PRSA Los Angeles. It's a great way to not only get yourself involved with people of like-minded interests, it's a way to develop your professional and leadership development skills, and certainly a way to be amongst a community of people that support one another and really care for one another in times of good times and bad times. So I encourage you to get involved. You can go online to the prsala.org website and click on About Us, and then click on Committees, and you'll see not only a list of all the committees that we have, but the names of the chair people of those committees and their email address. So you can go right to the source. Or tonight, if you'd like to talk to somebody about getting involved, our vice president of PRSA Los Angeles, who is in charge of volunteer coordination, is here tonight, and I'd like him to stand. Brian O'Connor, this gentleman right here, if you want to hand him your business card, he'd be happy to follow up with you, and you can have one-on-one interaction. So do get involved if you're already a member, and if you're not, I encourage you to join, because the promotion lasts only until the end of March. You can join after that, but it's till the end of March that you'll get that free chapter membership. So with that, I'm going to give it back to you, Jeff.
We're talking tonight about whether this is a time of opportunity or more time of problems, but I must say that I love the concept that a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. And I can't think of people better prepared to deal with a crisis than the people in this room. Ernie mentioned that this is the 19th time that we've held this symposium, and he acknowledged Patricia Smith, but I want to especially ask her to stand, the widow of Doc Smith and person who's been such a strong supporter of this for so long. And she and Paul Holmes are probably the only two people who could say for certain if this is true. But there are those who think that Paul may have given the second or third of these talks before. And he's promised us, for anybody who was here before, that he would use some of those wonderful jokes again. Paul, of course, is the editor of the Holmes Report, which is an enormously important electronic newsletter devoted to global knowledge and insights for public relations professionals. My guess is that everybody here reads it. He's also the person who runs the Sabre Awards competition for excellence in public relations and publishes the annual PR agency report card, which profiles 150 PR firms. So please join me in welcoming once again back to the stage for an encore performance, Paul Holmes.
Okay, so here are these two jokes. The first one is that I keep getting introduced at these things as being a leading commentator on the public relations industry, and I always tell people that that's like being the world's tallest midget. The second one is that my only real claim to fame, based on my resume, is that I've been associated with more failed public relations titles than anybody else in the history of the business. The other is that I've never actually worked a day in my life in the field of public relations, which is to say that I don't do what you guys either do or one day hope to do. I'll be honest with you, I will be quite happy if I can die making the same claim, because I think I have the best job in the business. The reason that I have the infernal hubris to stand up in front of an audience full of people who, many of them have been in this business for 20, 30, 40 years, and tell them what's going on in their own world, is that my job affords me the opportunity to sit down with more public relations people and more people who hire public relations people than almost anybody else. And there's a wonderful quotation that I've been using certainly since the last time I was here, and probably long before that, and I've still never actually bothered to source it, which makes me a pretty lousy journalist. But somebody once said, if you steal ideas from one person, it's plagiarism. If you steal them from more than one, it's research. This is therefore an extraordinarily well-researched presentation, because some of the ideas that I'm going to throw out at you over the next half hour or so have been stolen from a wide variety of sources, both inside and outside the public relations industry. It's sort of interesting to be talking to such a mixed audience in terms of background and professional status. And I hope that as I go through sort of some of the ideas that I want to share with you tonight, that there'll be a little something for everyone. For those of you in the PR agency business, I want to touch on why I think that this current economic crisis is a critical inflection point for our industry. I have the classic journalist's answer to whether this is an opportunity or a catastrophe. And the classic journalist's answer to any question like that is, it's both. There are going to be a lot of winners at the end of this recession, and there are going to be some big losers. And so I want to talk a little bit about what I think is going to separate the former from the latter. Hopefully some of it will be helpful in ensuring that you're among the winners. For those of you who are studying public relations and about to come out into the world of public relations employment, I have what I hope is encouraging news, because despite what's going on right now, despite what I suspect is going to continue to go on for the next 12 months or so, I think the long-term prospects for this industry are extraordinarily good. I would much rather be graduating and looking for a public relations job in the next 12 months than looking for a job in mainstream media, or looking for a job in advertising, or looking for a job in almost any other communications discipline, and I want to talk a little bit about why that is. And then I'm going to reserve sort of the mean, nasty part of my speech for those of you who work in-house in large corporations, because I think that there are some very worrying things happening right now as far as the status of in-house corporate communications is concerned. And I'll touch on those hopefully at the end of the good news part of my presentation. But maybe I'll start with a short story that I think illustrates how the world has changed and why the changes are important for the public relations business. This story was first actually told to me by someone at Marjorie Krause's firm working in Europe. And it took place just before the Olympics in Beijing. And in the spring before the Olympics, a young Chinese student was backpacking through Germany. And at a small railway station in the middle of Germany, waiting for a train, he spotted an advertisement for Coca-Cola. This was a very old advertisement. It was almost 4 years old. It was a poster. It was on the back of a vending machine. It hadn't been taken down because nobody had gotten around to it. It certainly hadn't been considered as a potential public relations problem. And on the poster, there was an illustration of several Tibetan monks going over a roller coaster with an expression of pure joy on their face, and then the Coca-Cola tagline, enjoy the product. The student took a photograph of the poster and posted it to a bulletin board in China. Within about 48 hours, close to 20,000 Chinese students had signed up to boycott Coca-Cola because they believed that the advertisement was an expression of the company's support for the Tibetan struggle for independence. By the time anybody at Coca-Cola headquarters knew what had happened, this small poster in a small railway station in a small market had become an international crisis. There were calls for Coca-Cola to be banned as a sponsor of the Olympics. There were calls for a boycott of its products. Students in China were mobilizing against the company. And to me, the story illustrates the fact that we are living in a world in which consumers are uniquely, as never before, empowered to act in concert against a company, where information, and more to the point, misinformation, can spread from one continent to another almost instantaneously. We are living in a world in which the transparency that some of us in the public relations business have been talking about for 15 or 20 years is now an absolute reality. Organizations are subject to greater scrutiny, greater interaction, greater pressure than they've ever had to deal with in the past. And this is fundamentally changing the way organizations have to do business. The good news is, it's changing it in a way that makes public relations more important than it's ever been. I've given a lot of speeches over the last 10 or 15 years in which I bemoan the fact that, in my opinion, public relations is the most underutilized discipline in corporate America. I believe that most organizations use public relations to a fraction of its ability to contribute to success or failure. First of all, most organizations continue to view public relations as a communications function. It isn't, or at least it isn't just a communications function. Public relations is much more about how an organization behaves than it is about how it communicates. And in a world in which we're experiencing the kind of radical transparency that I'm talking about, any dissonance between communication and behavior is readily apparent and is easily shared. And so the need for those two things to be brought into alignment is, I think, a greater imperative today than it ever has been in the past. And I don't think there's anybody in the organization as well equipped as the public relations person to lead that. I think we've entered an era in which every time an organization, I think to a certain extent this has always been true, but again, I think it's more true today, less easy to ignore today than it ever has been. Every time an organization makes a decision, it needs to consider not only the operational, legal, and financial implications that are always part of the decision-making process. It needs to consider the relationship or reputational implications of that decision, and it needs to consider that as routinely and formally as it considers the other three things. And I think in that kind of environment, public relations has to move closer to the center of power. What kind of decisions am I talking about? Any decision that has the potential to impact the relationship between an organization and any or all of its stakeholders should not be made without consulting a public relations person first. What kind of decision does that mean? My favorite example of this comes from about 5 or 6 years ago when I wrote a story in a magazine that I was publishing at the time about, I believe it was the Ford Bronco. And the Ford Bronco was prone to rolling over, and Ford was sued by people who'd been victims of the rollover. And one of the things that emerged during the trial was that somebody at Ford had thought it was a good idea not to bother putting in what they call you've got to forgive me, I'm a New Yorker. I know this sounds bizarre to people who live in LA. I've never actually driven a car in my life. As far as I'm concerned, cars are either yellow or, if I'm in London, black. They're driven by foreigners. You sit in the back of them and you hope they take you to where you ask them to. That's my experience with cars. But my understanding for writing this Ford Bronco story is that a lot of the sort of bigger SUV type vehicles have something called a rollover bar, which is designed to prevent rollovers. The Ford Bronco didn't have a rollover bar, but it did have, this is the beauty of this story, something called a rollover bar effect. What it meant was that the company hadn't put in an actual rollover bar, but they'd put in something that, if you didn't look too closely, appeared as if it was a rollover bar. This was a brilliant design decision. And so I wrote an article in the magazine that said, where were the Ford public relations people when this decision was made? It obviously had serious implications for the reputation of Ford Motor Company, and somebody from public relations should have stood up and said, this is a ridiculous idea. This is the fun part of the story. About a week later, I got a letter to the editor of the magazine from a practitioner. And the practitioner was, I think, kind of tired of my hectoring the industry, which I do have a tendency to do on occasion. And he said, you know, Paul Holmes is always telling us that PR people should counsel the CEO on big decisions. And he's always telling us that they should get involved in financial communications and making sure that you know, we communicate with shareholders. And he wants us to get involved with employee communications. And now he wants us to get involved in design. Is there anything that he doesn't think public relations people should be involved in? And so I ran the letter to the editor, but because I'm a snarky son of a gun and I own the magazine, I also ran my response. And my response was this: can you imagine somebody writing to a legal publication and saying, this publication wants us to make sure that the CEO acts legally, and they want us to make sure that the financials are legal, they want us to make sure that all our employment contracts are legal, and now they want us to make sure that the design is legal as well? Is there no end to what they want lawyers to do? Well, you know, no, there isn't. If something has the ability to impact your organization's reputation, and you as the individual responsible for managing reputation aren't there, then something is wrong within the organization, either with you or with your management. We'll get to that a little bit later when I get onto the corporate communications part of the presentation. So we're living in an environment, it seems to me, in which the need for transparency and the need for authenticity make public relations more important than ever before. And the good news is that, to a large extent, the industry has risen to that challenge over the last 2 or 3 years. And I was talking with Don Spetner about this a few minutes before everybody filed into the room. The public relations industry so far has been considerably more resilient and robust in the face of this recession than I would have expected it to be. The reality is that since I started writing about this business, which is nearly 25 years ago, I've been through about 4 serious downturns. And going into every one of them, I had an earnest conversation with a public relations person who told me with complete sincerity that public relations was counter-cyclical, that because public relations was cheaper than advertising, when times were tough, people would turn away from advertising and spend more on public relations. And this recession was going to be just great for us. Not all of them went out of business, but enough of them did. The reality is that public relations has never been counter-cyclical, regardless of what we would like to think about the business. I'll talk about that in a minute. But going into this recession, there are actually signs that some of those very Pollyanna-ish predictions about how the industry would fare are turning out this time to be true. I have sat down and spoken with clients who are, in fact, shifting some of their advertising money into public relations. And while I don't think we are going to escape the worst of the recession by any stretch of the imagination, I think the pain is going to be fairly widespread throughout the industry. I think there are lots of reasons to believe that both the long-term future of this business and indeed its short-term ability to cope are better than almost all of its rivals, competitors, and peers. Let's talk about the resilience, because I think that there are a few things that have happened to this industry, and the agency business perhaps in particular, that have equipped us to deal with this better than I might have anticipated. I'm going to start in the marketing arena, because I think that there has been a huge change in the marketing business over the last 6 or 7 years. 5 years ago, at the behest of the Council of Public Relations Firms, I moderated a roundtable of chief marketing officers. I sat down around a table with 6 or 7 CMOs, and we talked about what they hated about public relations, which is always entertaining. And the sort of 2 comments that stuck with me long after that meeting had ended were that marketers no longer cared where big ideas came from. They wanted great ideas. Traditionally, they had turned for those ideas to their advertising agency. But the world had changed, and they were prepared to take big ideas from wherever they came. If they came out of public relations, sales promotion, direct marketing, advertising, branding, management consulting, entertainment, they didn't care. They wanted big brand platform ideas. The second thing that stuck with me as a consequence of that meeting was that public relations people weren't bringing them those ideas. The complaint I heard over and over again was that PR people only brought them PR ideas. They were great, and I think there's been an interesting evolution in this business, in the marketing side of this business, over the last 10 years or so. That goes like this. 10 years ago, I think most public relations firms were great at publicity, and they understood the media. 5 years ago, they got good at branding, so they understood the brand. Today, the best of them, the ones that are going to succeed, the ones that are going to come through the recession healthy, don't just understand the media and the brand, they understand the consumer. They are capable of delivering back to their clients genuine consumer insights, genuine new understandings of what consumers want and how they want it. The PR people have gotten better at this for a couple of reasons. First of all, because they're being asked to, but also partly because as the money that comes into this industry grows, as the budgets get bigger, PR firms are finally able to invest some of it back in research in the way that advertising people have always done. And so you're getting a much more empirically based public relations programming out there, which I think is a very healthy thing. And that research and some of the quantitative information it brings back, coupled with the fact that public relations people are, by the nature of their work, closer to and more interactive with stakeholders than advertising people are, means that they are finally being able to develop genuine insights which are different and in many cases better than some of the insights that are brought in by the traditional ad people. And one of the great examples of a public relations-driven branding campaign that I think has the potential to change dramatically the way the marketing business works and has already become a sort of cause célèbre, most of you are familiar with it, is the Dove Real Beauty campaign. The Real Beauty campaign is at its heart a public relations campaign. It is about engaging on an emotional level with consumers around an issue that they really care about, that touches their lives, and doing it across a myriad of channels. Yes, there's a lot of advertising. There's also a lot of original research. There's community relations. There's cause-related marketing. There's volunteerism on the part of company employees. This is a real broad-based and frankly, yes, authentic program. It's a program that the Unilever brand lives as well as talks about. And that, to me, is where the future of marketing is going. It's one of the reasons why I'm excited about the role that public relations has to play in the marketing arena going forward, a much more central role. The second thing that's happened, particularly in the marketing arena, is the rise of digital communications. Back about 10 or 15 years ago, as the internet began to take hold, and the fact that I'm old enough to remember a day before the internet is kind of scary. I also used to use carbon paper. Yeah, I got a laugh from the 7 people in the room who remember what carbon paper is. During the first internet revolution, I got tired of going around giving speeches at which I said, there's no opportunity so big that the public relations industry cannot somehow contrive to miss it. Because I think the first internet revolution came along and passed us by and was dominant. You know, it was fascinating to sit in meetings with people from different disciplines, and the advertising people would say, the internet's an advertising medium. We're going to have banner ads everywhere. It's going to be great. Pop-ups. People will love pop-ups. And the design people would say, no, it's all about design. It's all about creating a site in a way that brings people to where you want them to be. And the direct mail people would say, no, it's all about direct because we'll be able to do relationship marketing. I love the term relationship marketing. Relationship marketing, we'll get everybody's email address and send them emails constantly because nothing says, I have a relationship with you like spamming you to death. And, it's a relationship in pretty much the same way that stalking is a relationship, okay? And the fact that we allowed them to take that term and use it is an embarrassment to the industry, but never mind that. And the PR people would sit in the corner of the room going, gee, I wonder what it is. Well, you know what? The internet's a PR medium. The internet's a PR medium because, first of all, even in the early days, it was clearly more about conversation, more about dialogue than it was about monologue. It was about community building. It was about engaging with people, not just bombarding them with messages. It was about educating them, not selling them. It was about about providing them with information so they could make their own choices. It was about multiple stakeholders. Your consumers are on the internet, but so are your employees, so are your shareholders, so are the people in the communities where you operate. It's a multi-stakeholder environment. All of these things make it a classic PR environment. And now, with the emergence of Web 2.0, bloggers, social media, social networks, Second Life, viral campaigns, it is more a public relations medium than ever. Everybody is competing to own the internet. I hate the term own the internet, and I'm going to use it because I just can't think of a better way to express it. But the reality is that if anybody does, it should be us. And the reason it should be us is because the process that you use in this new Web 2.0 social networking world is the public relations process. The public relations process is this. You tell your story to an influential individual, and then you hope that that influential individual goes out and tells it, adding credibility and endorsement to other people. That's what public relations people do. Historically, we've done it with journalists. But doing it with a blogger is no different. Doing it with a hairdresser is no different. Doing it with a kid who's running a great gaming site is no different. The process is exactly the same. You go out, you tell your story, and then you rely on other people to tell it for you, to multiply it, to make it more credible, to make it more powerful, to put it into their own words, to add their own enthusiasm and excitement to it. This is pure and simple public relations. It's what we do. And the thing that's happening that I think creates whole new opportunities for us in this environment is that companies are finally beginning to realize that control is the enemy of credibility, that control is not the most valuable commodity in communication or in relating with outside stakeholders. It's the least valuable. It's the least valuable because if you control a message, people don't believe it. They especially don't believe it now because there's this incredible cynicism about authority in general, with the one possible exception of our newly elected president. People do not trust institutions. They certainly don't trust corporations. And so letting go of control of the message, allowing other people to spread it and disseminate it and amplify it for you is absolutely essential. And you can't get more credibility, you can't get more authenticity, you can't get more trust into the relationship without letting go of control. And public relations people, if they're good at what they do, have always been able to let go of control. There is that point where after you've told the story to the journalist, you don't know whether he's going to go out and tell it the way you want him to. And that's not the problem anymore, it's the answer. And in that environment, there are just incredible opportunities for public relations. I'm going to whiz through some of the things that I see happening on the corporate front too, because I think on the sort of corporate reputation arena, there are plenty of things going on that are good for our business. One of them is, and this is a complete reversal from the last time I went through one of these cycles, corporate social responsibility. Over the last 10 years, corporate social responsibility has moved from a nice-to-have item on a company's expenditure list to a must-have item. And most companies, I'm not going to say all, but most companies are smart enough to realize that they cannot sacrifice their commitment to corporate social responsibility and to communicating their corporate social responsibility just because times are tough. I'm seeing this particularly in Europe, where I've sat down with corporate communications people who said, you know, we've been told to cut 10, 20, 25% across the board. The only thing we can't touch is the CSR program. Two reasons for this. First of all, CSR has become for many organizations an operational issue as well as a public relations issue. People now see particularly sustainability as a route to saving money. And so that makes it much more embedded in the organization than it would traditionally have been. But the other thing is, in this transparent world that hungers for authenticity that I've been talking about, you can't be authentic some of the time. If you are a responsible company, I'm sorry, you have to be responsible when times are tough too. You can't just switch it off and say, actually, we're going to go back to being the old, nasty, unfriendly company that we used to be for the next couple of years. And then when things turn around, we'll pick it up again. That's not an authentic commitment, and it's going to be regarded with cynicism, with skepticism, with hostility. If you're going to do that, you might as well acknowledge the moment you do it that you're not going to be able to turn it on again, that you're not going to be able to come back to those people 2 years later and say, okay, we're back and we're socially responsible again. Social responsibility today has to be an organizational commitment, and it has to be a permanent organizational commitment, and a lot of companies have come to realize that. Another thing that's sort of good news about this crisis from the perspective of the public relations industry is that it's a crisis of trust. And the reality is that you cannot rebuild trust without over-communicating. So a lot of those companies who have spent the last 6 months hiding under their desks are at some point going to have to come out and start explaining what's going on and why they should be allowed back into the civilized discourse of our nation. And they're going to have a lot of explaining to do, and public relations people are the ones who are going to have to lead that explanation. They're going to have to craft those messages. They're going to have to make sure that the behavior of those organizations aligns with those messages. There's going to be a huge challenge there that we're going to rise to. And already, I mean, you know, the one part of this industry that is not suffering right now is the crisis management business. There's plenty of crisis work. And, you know, if nothing else, thank God for the fact that many of the people getting paid millions of dollars to run large American institutions appear to be complete morons, because the amount of work that is generating, cleaning up after the mess they make, is really quite impressive. Final area that I should touch on in the reasons why I think we've been a little more robust than I would have expected, is that there's going to be a lot of work in the public affairs arena over the next 12 or 18 months. Actually, there are two interesting things coming out of Washington. The first is this huge investment in public infrastructure. There's been a lot of discussion in Washington of what are called shovel-ready projects and the ability to sort of hit the ground running with these infrastructure projects. What very few people have talked about, but what is clearly a major issue, is that even if the projects are shovel-ready, they're not always public approval-ready. The reality is that if you want to build a high-speed train, there are a lot of people whose backyard it runs through that you've got to get permission from before you do. Community outreach, building support for these projects is going to create a lot of work for the right kind of firms. The second thing that's going to happen is in the public affairs arena is that the wonderful thing about a crisis like this is that it creates a huge avalanche of regulation. The bad news is that if past history is anything to go by, and I hold up Sarbanes-Oxley as Exhibit 1 in this case, most of that regulation is going to be incredibly badly thought out and full of unintended consequences. And somebody is going to have to stand in front of that avalanche of regulation and not turn it back, partly because I don't think corporations can afford to be seen to be holding up regulation, to be defying regulation, partly because it's a thankless and fruitless task anyway. So not necessarily to hold it back, but at least to shape it so it's not quite as bad as it otherwise would have been. And developing and ensuring sensible regulation is going to be a huge challenge for public affairs firms in Washington and around the nation, and that's going to create a lot of work for public relations people. So there's a lot of, am I long now? Have I gone too far? Okay, all right. So there's a lot of there's a lot of reasons to believe that the industry will find at least pockets of activity where it can continue to make a lot of money and certainly make an impact. So what do I think the issues are? I talked earlier about, from the agency point of view, they are these. I talked earlier about the need for the fact that some marketers are beginning to shift money away from mainstream advertising and into digital and public relations. And I certainly think that's happening, but it's not happening universally. And what's happened is, over the last 4 or 5 years, everybody was pretty much moving incrementally from mainstream, traditional, old-fashioned advertising into using more new channels of communication. What's happened over the last 6 months, I think, is that sort of monolithic group of companies that was moving in one direction as one has split in two. And there are two kinds of companies in the world. I have a friend who's fond of saying there are two kinds of people in the world, the kind of people who are always dividing things into two kinds and the kind of people who are not. I'm one of those people who's always dividing things into two kinds. There are two kinds of companies out there right now. There are companies that have been doing the new media stuff, the social media, the digital media, the right way. That is to say, they've been going into it with a strategy, they've been monitoring the ROI, they understand why they're doing it. And then there are companies that have been doing it the wrong way. Companies that have been doing it the wrong way have basically just said, hey, this internet stuff is really cool. Let's do everything and see what happens. Let's buy an island in Second Life and put a YouTube video up and have our CEO Twitter. And, we'll do a viral campaign. And the chief motivation, as far as I can tell, is to be able to brag about how cool your new marketing stuff is the next time you go to an AMA conference. So, needless to say, the companies that have been doing it the right way have already, I think, started to accelerate their move into new and digital media and public relations. And I'll talk about why in a second, because that's another critical issue. The companies that are doing it the wrong way are running back to traditional advertising because in a crisis, they are more comfortable with what they know best, with what they've always done, and they have no compelling reason to move. The bad news is, as in any crisis or indeed any environment, there are 10 times more stupid companies than there are smart companies. So for the time being, at least, there are going to be more people retreating than there are accelerating. We can live with that, I think, most of us. The second thing that's key to all of this is the ability of public relations to demonstrate return on investment. And as an industry, we have a serious problem in this regard. And the problem is this. When times are good and clients are walking through the door basically begging us to take their business as agencies, we don't bother with ROI because we don't need it. We don't need to prove that what we do is working. Everybody takes it on faith. When times are bad, we don't invest in ROI because, God damn it, it's expensive and it's too late anyway. So as an industry, we have a sort of ROI issue. Everybody knows about it. I could give a whole lecture on that single subject. The good news is that there are people out there who do care enough about ROI to do the work, and the work has come out of the client side of the business. And one of the things that is incredibly compelling is the work that's come out of Procter & Gamble in the last 3 or 4 years on marketing mix modeling. I'm not going to pretend to understand regression analysis and all the other sort of wonky data stuff that you need to study in order to know what this means, but all I know is that every marketing mix modeling study that I have ever seen shows that advertising spend reached the point of diminishing returns quite a while ago, and public relations is nowhere near it. And any company with half a brain is going to look at that and say that they need to take some money out of advertising and put it into public relations. That process has been much more incremental than I would like. One of the reasons is that public relations people are not doing enough to demonstrate ROI. One of the things that's going to divide winning agencies from, the two things that are going to divide winning agencies from losing agencies. The first is having smart clients. And the second is having really demonstrated ROI over the years. The third is being higher up the value chain. Fairly obviously, the closer you are to the CEO, the closer you are to working on issues that are vital to the survival of the client company, the better off you are. The bad news, unfortunately, is that if you don't have all of those three things aligned, it's probably a little late to start thinking about it now. So, what's my bad news for the public relations industry? The first is quickly on the agency side. Every time something comes like this comes along, agencies react in exactly the same way. It's predictable, it's understandable, it's mind-blowingly stupid. 2 years ago, I was sitting down with agencies talking about what their biggest challenge was. All of them identified the same biggest challenge. The biggest challenge was finding good people. Particularly, the biggest challenge was finding good people with 5 or 6 years experience, mid-level managers. Why were there no people with 5 or 6 years experience? Because the last time there was a recession, PR firms fired an entire generation of account executives who would have been 5 or 6 years experience right now, but instead are off being journalists or housewives or exploring the Andes or working in the Peace Corps. I don't know what they're doing. This industry has this wonderful habit of sort of overreacting to every crowd, immediately slicing what it thinks is dead wood, and then turning around 2 years later and bemoaning the fact that there's no talent. So while I certainly understand the need to cut costs, I would urge the agency business not to make the same mistake that it's been making for the 20 years that I've been covering it. It will, but I'd still like to urge it, if that's okay with everybody here. Now, here's the other part of bad news. And I'm very conscious that I'm running into everybody else's time here, sorry. I'm worried about the corporate communications function, the in-house communications function. I have a couple of reasons for worrying. The first is this. For 20 years, we've been talking about the seat at the table, this mythical sort of role that public relations people will have in policy and decision making. And I have been told time and time again of the great progress we have made in terms of being taken seriously and having that role. But it's hard to look at the events of the last 6 months and believe that there has been genuine progress. Because if there had been genuine progress, the CEO of General Motors and Ford would not have flown to Washington, D.C. on a private jet. And the CEO of whoever it is this week would not have held a party with Sheryl Crow, bringing in at the cost of millions of dollars their clients from around the world. And the CEO of the big banks would not be spending millions of dollars getting his office refurbished. Okay? When I said earlier that public relations people ought to be involved in every decision that has the potential to impact an organization's reputation, I don't think that there are any more obvious examples of decisions that have the potential to impact a reputation. All of those things have damaged the reputation both of the individual companies and of corporate America collectively over the last few years. So, one of three things is true. Either, in all of these situations, one of three things is true. The first possibility is that the PR person was brought into the room and asked, do you think it would be a good idea for us to spend a couple of $1 million on an elephant skin wastebasket for the CEO, at a time when we've just borrowed $20 billion from the American taxpayer, because, his existing trash can is a little, it's plastic, it's not very nice. And the PR guy said, yeah, I think that's a great idea, The second possibility is that he was called in, or she was called in, and said, that's the dumbest idea I ever heard in my life. You can't do that. We are living in an age of transparency. At some point, probably sooner rather than later, that decision is going to be on the front page of the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, it's going to be on CNN, it's going to be on MSNBC, and you're going to look like a horse's end. The third possibility is, and the most likely, frankly, is that the public relations person was never called into the room at all. And if that's what happened, then we don't have a seat at the table. We don't have it. Because if we had a seat at the table when stupid decisions were being made, we would have the opportunity to stop them. The reality is that companies continue to make decisions that impact their reputation and continue to do it without it ever occurring to them that they should talk to somebody in public relations. So the stature of our profession in organizations, it seems to me, is still not where it needs to be, despite all of the talk about a seat at the table that I've heard over the last 15 or 20 years. The other thing that worries me, because that's a difficult one to address, and hopefully we can, as a panel, talk a little bit about what's happening, and maybe I can be corrected by some of the people who deal with this on a day-to-day basis. The second thing that worries me is that the biggest opportunity that I've talked about today, this whole thing about engagement, about social media, about building communities, about relating to people in a different way, ought to be being led from within organizations by the corporate communications people. And as far as I can see, it's not. It's being led by marketing. That worries me because marketers don't actually want to build relationships, they want to sell things, at the risk of being sort of slightly simplistic about it. And I think that the people who have the right skill set to lead this, the people who have the right mentality to engage, are the corporate communications people. They're not doing it for two reasons. The first is that they haven't been given the budget, and the second is that they are far too timid about what's happening in the online world. I sat down with somebody recently who had been talking to his PR agency about creating an online community. And he'd gone through the whole process with them. It sounded like a great idea, and at the very last minute, he'd pulled the plug. And the reason he'd pulled the plug wasn't the budget. It was because, and I quote, it was too risky. And so I asked him, well, what do you mean by risky? And he said, well, the risk is that we're going to create this online community, and people are going to rush in, and they're all going to be intensely critical of our organization. And there's suddenly going to be this place on the internet where people are talking about how much we suck. And that's the risk. And I said, you know, classic term of our times, that's not a bug, it's a feature. That's why you do it, right? You do it because you want to find out what people are saying about your organization. It's not like they're not saying these things and they're suddenly going to start saying them because you give them a forum. Right now, they're saying them, but they're saying them in places where you can't hear, respond to, or correct them. Create a forum where they can come, and even if they are initially critical, it gives you an opportunity to engage, which is the great opportunity of our time. You know, we've moved from an era where brand and a reputation are all the things you tell people about yourself, to an era where a brand and a reputation are all the things that they say about you after you've left the room. And getting involved with those discussions, influencing those discussions, and most important of all, listening to those discussions is a great challenge for our profession right now. And we're not going to be able to rise to that challenge by being nervous about the fact that some of it's going to be unpleasant. I think that there are plenty of reasons, I hope I've touched on some of them, to believe that public relations is entering a golden age, regardless of what's happening in the economy right now. The next year or so is going to be deeply unpleasant for a lot of people, but the long-term future for this industry, I believe, is spectacularly good. So if I have to come down on the side of catastrophe or opportunity, I think it's an opportunity. Thank you very much, and sorry for...
Take a seat down there. Paul, that was wonderful. There are two kinds of speakers, those who love their subjects and those who don't. We sure heard from somebody who loves his subject, and it was terrific. We have three marvelous panelists with us tonight, and maybe I could ask the three of you to come up. Don Spetner at Korn Ferry, and there's a certain common theme here, which is actually the largest executive recruiting firm in the world. He focuses exclusively on recruiting senior-level executives with expertise in corporate communication, media, investor relations, and internal communications, advertising, branding, and crisis management. And please join me in welcoming Don Spetner. Phyllis Piano actually helped us create this program when she was at Raytheon as the top communications officer. She's now at Amgen, which is also the largest in its field. It's the largest biotech firm in the world. And she's responsible for internal and external communications, public relations, communications, issues management, corporate brand management, it goes on. Web communications, everything that Paul said somebody's got to do. Please join me in welcoming Phyllis Piano. And finally, and we're going to run out of largest, because you can't be the largest of everything, Marjorie Krause runs the largest public affairs firm in the world. She's the president and chief executive officer of APCO Worldwide. It's a multinational corporations firm in major cities throughout America, Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and Asia. She's won all kinds of awards, including Entertainment of the Year, could be that, Entrepreneur, that would have been with Rita's help. Entrepreneur of the Year, Washington PR Woman of the Year, Lifetime Achievement Award, and so forth. And she specializes in strategic counsel and issue-based communications. Please join me in welcoming Marjorie Krause. This is a terrific panel. We're going to have a conversation in which each of our panelists will talk for 5 to 7 minutes. Then we will have a discussion among ourselves, and then we will. And then we're going to open up to the audience. I know that Marjorie, you've got to leave before everything is finished, but hopefully by that time we'll actually be in our reception period. And if we're in our reception period, terrific people get a chance to tell you, well, to give you their cards. But otherwise, you may have to leave while still on the stage. Anyway, it's a terrific group, and Margie, maybe we could start with you.
Okay, I'm here really wearing two hats because I'm also the incoming chair for the Council of Public Relations Firms. And I thought, and the reason I'm mentioning that is that if we're looking at whether this is a catastrophe or an opportunity, I can speak for myself, and by full disclosure, I'm an eternal optimist. So I think you'll understand where I come down, but I also have a bit of an overview, not as big as Paul's, but of the industry. And obviously this has been the source of a lot of discussion. I think probably the characterization that I'd say from the industry that I've heard is that everybody's running faster to stay the same. I think in the long term there's a whole sense of optimism, and I do think that this will cause a shakeout between, I would say, the firms that get it right and the firms that don't. And so I think that what will happen is that the next few months, if people can organize and without cutting their nose to spite their face, as Paul said before, with losing really good people, I think then those firms will have a great future, because I am very bullish about the industry for all the reasons that Paul said. I believe that there is a migration, and we were trying to quantify this, and we're working on quantifying it, a migration from advertising to the public relations space. And so I would offer that all of you should go to the website for the Council of Public Relations Firms and follow along during this period of time. So with that hat kind of taken off, then I can speak to something I'm intimately familiar with, and that's my own situation. So I run a firm that's in 29 cities around the world and about 20 countries. And it's very hard to manage a firm during this time, because we are probably in that really coveted space that Paul was talking about. You know, we're dealing at the CEO level, we're dealing with high-end issues, we're dealing with life or death things, where, you know, we do a lot of crisis work. We work at the intersection of where policy or government, business, and the media converge. So there's a great, you know, opportunity, I think, in this period of time when, you know, after all these years of working in countries where you kind of bemoan the nationalization of business, you know, we're finding that we can't say these things anymore in other markets because we're doing it here. So we're kind of in this interesting space. But I do think the one thing that is happening is that the people who are your clients, even if you work smarter, even if you try to hug your clients more and demonstrate value, people are much slower to make decisions. So even if they're, say you're hired and you beat everybody else out, it sometimes is taking an extra few months to do the contracting process or to actually get the money released from the company, not from your client, but from the people that they have to go to. So I think the challenge is really trying to calibrate this, especially when you look at a global company and try to understand what's going on in one part of the world versus another. And I have a couple little anecdotes that maybe would be interesting, because I think a lot of the opportunity revolves around the stimulus plans that are being developed around the world. And we have an international advisory council. We have people from all over the world on this, and I do a monthly call. So the last call was about the stimulus program, and I had the Indians arguing with the Chinese and the US and the Germans, and we had a very interesting discussion. And one of the things that we're finding is that some of the stimulus program, not the US stimulus program, although that could be, will have unintended consequences. The China stimulus program right now is putting a lot of money into the hands of Chinese businesses versus the other businesses in that market. Those businesses will end up being a lot more competitive in a down market. And it will force some people that have the technology and have other things that are important in that market out of the market. I'm not sure that's what's intended, but the reason that's relevant to what we're saying is I think that the role that we have as communicators is to work with those companies to help them push back. to make sure that they're articulating clearly the consequences of their action during this kind of a time, so that governments can make the right decisions. There's a whole different partnership now between business and government. And if we don't play a role in helping to shape that, then that's going to be imbalanced, and it could lead to consequences that we don't anticipate. The other thing, and I'm going to cut this short so everybody has time, but the one thing I did really want to stress also, we're headquartered out of Washington, and maybe this is a bias or a perspective that is just inherent in the way we look at things. I think that what we're facing, as much as the financial disasters that have happened, is a total crisis of confidence. I think that confidence comes from the way in which we all feel about what we do every day, what we see in the media. And if our government, or any of these governments, do not learn how to package properly and communicate directly to people, we are going to be in this crisis of confidence much longer. And I think that we have elected somebody who's generally a good communicator, but I'm not sure that that they're doing as good a job doing this as they should be. And I think it's also goes beyond the president. And if you think about what the Treasury Secretary did and how it affected the stock market, I think if ever there was an opportunity to look at the value creation and destruction that comes from communications and the importance of what we're all about, it's now. And so I would be, I think, derelict in my discussion not to say that. And I think the real question is how we can encourage the governments to do this. And I think the next real tipping point, it'll be interesting, is around the G20 Summit, which is in the beginning of April, I think, in London. And excuse me, I was in Davos a couple months ago, and nobody had solutions, but everybody's waiting for the G20 Summit, thinking magically that when these countries get together, somehow that's going to make the next step. If they walk away from that meeting and don't think about the messaging that they are sending to the world, I think we'll see the market go down again. So I think there's a direct correlation between the markets, the trust, and what we do, and so that's why I think there's a real role for our profession.
Marjorie, before we turn to Phyllis, and I thought Paul's remarks actually were terrific on so many scores, and I agree with your passion actually for public relations and how important it is. But I want to ask a question, and when you answer, keep in mind there could be people in here twittering. Everything is public, so we all know that. But what is the risk in this period in which people are criticized for their animal skin wastebaskets, for people being criticized for spending too much money on public relations?
And you can Twitter, it's okay. I'm on the record. I think that public relations as a profession kind of has a bad name to it. I don't know how else to say that. I'm not sure that that everything has to be under that rubric. I think you explain the same way you would explain everything else you do. I mean, a lot of what we do, we call business diplomacy, because what we're trying to do is create value for companies and markets, and I think you have to explain yourself. And I think of a line item, to the lay person, public relations is like spin, or somehow doesn't have the value component to it. And maybe somebody else could say this more eloquently than I can. But I think you have to do what you have to do. And I think you have to find a way to be honest, be straightforward, and do it. And I think it's very much. I'd much rather be justifying the spend for communicating and interacting with people, and I think that's at the heart of it, than I would about talking about a wastebasket that's so far beyond comprehension that I don't know how you explain it.
Thank you, Marjorie. Phyllis.
Well, I thought I'd give you on this, and this is fantastic to be here on this panel and with these colleagues who are so distinguished, but I think my role today was to talk about the corporate environment. So I'll try and talk about that a little bit, and I think there's some people here who might be interested in hearing about jobs and you know what the landscape, and that'll be a good, I think, segue to Don, I think, who will pick up on that. So I want to give you a little bit of the landscape of what it's like to be in a company right now. We're lucky to be in Amgen. We're the largest biotechnology company. You've probably read a lot about what's happening in the pharma and healthcare space. There's been some talk about healthcare being a little bit safe, in a sense. Well, I mean, I would say that could be true or it could be not true. Our stock went down 10% today when President Obama started talking about healthcare reform and biosimilars, and I won't get into that. So I think one of the things you have to do today is have your seatbelt on. It's going to be bumpy. You got to stay true to your mission. Our mission is to serve patients and develop human therapeutics. You know, it's interesting. Jeff mentioned I was at Raytheon, and some people, you know, you talk about, gee, it's not rocket science. That was, and it's not the cure for cancer. This is. So you know, it's been great to be with such fantastic people and doing very, very hard things, because we are working on cures for cancer and things like that. So in Amgen, I think we're in a good place. One of the things we're doing is you've probably heard a lot about healthcare and patent expiry and people, you know, trying to find the next thing and trying to buy companies. You've seen some takeovers. That's a concern right now for companies, and I'll talk about that in a minute. We happen to have a potential new drug coming that is a game changer, that is so exciting and so fantastic. And so what we do is a lot around that. And I want to talk to you about how we think things through and how things are going on right now. This drug is called denosumab, and it's actually going to help in osteoporosis and actually can help prevent perhaps the progression of bone cancer. So it's very exciting. We're so excited about this. So this is great. So we have this potential for growth. Our stock was number 3 performer in the S&P in 2008. Now, it wasn't very good in 2007 when we took a dive. So because we went through some tough times, we went through a restructuring, very, very difficult. But we're on the road. So the way our company is positioned right now is very, very good. And so, but still, it's very tough in the way we're thinking about budgets, in the way we're thinking about hiring. So the kind of hiring I'm looking at doing right now is associated around this new drug. We filed for it for approval with the FDA. We won't hear until the end of the year. So we're doing a lot of things and thinking about hiring. We're probably one of the few companies that's thinking about hiring. But so it's very tough. We're looking at budgets. We're talking about discipline. We're talking about financial discipline across the company, because we have budgets that are set, and we don't know what's happening in this environment. We don't know what's going to happen in this economy. If anybody thinks that they know, they don't know. People are not taking their medicines. They don't have food. They're thinking, can I take my medicine, or can I eat and feed my family? So companies are watching this environment so closely and saying, what should we do? Let's be cautious. Let's not hire too much, because we just don't know. And so this is from talking to Amgen, where we see a bright future, where other companies, in terms of what's happening, it has been just a catastrophe. I don't know if you talk about the trust barometer that Edelman does, and if you haven't, you should look at it, where U.S. companies are now, the trust barometer says how much you trust, and this is huge for us. How much you trust is down from 58% to 30%, the biggest drop in the survey that they've done. People don't trust us in companies. They think we're terrible. Everything we do is questioned. We have to work, as you talked about, is absolutely true, and be more and more transparent.
You kind of wonder who those 38% are too, don't you?
Well, you know, it's really, really tough out there. So what we're doing is being really cautious, not hiring that much, but I do totally agree on the opportunity that's ahead of us. And I just have to give Marjorie a plug, who's here, because, you know, maybe perhaps we can talk a little bit afterwards, but her firm does the best reputation work that I've ever seen in survey work. And so what we do as a company, and when I came to Amgen a couple years ago, we started doing this reputation research, and there's a guy who works with Marjorie named Brian Drummond. It's the best I've ever seen. So he builds a reputation model that looks at the various parts that's for Amgen, and he does it for every company. So the kind of attributes with the audiences that we do and that we have to engage with, and we're engaging with, and says, where are we strong and where are we weak, and what do we need to do? And in this environment, you know, all companies have a lot of weaknesses. We have a lot of strengths. So this kind of stuff is so important. So you stick to your values, you have your mission, you have your textbook. You know, what is your strategy in terms of public relation and going at these things? And we're developing concrete programs from this research to do so. So it's an opportunity for us, and also the risk. I mean, we see risk. I mean, Paul's talking about a lot of things that happen. You know what? We miss stuff. You know, we miss stuff. I heard something today that's going to happen, I won't say where, that was the person in the room? No, the person wasn't in the room because they're not. These are people who get so into their job and they come to you and say, do you know what they're going to do over there? And you're going, oh my God. And sometimes it's too late. You can't get it, you can't get in. And I don't know if I can get in to change it, but this could be one where you'd see something, you know, Amgen. But it's people trying to do their jobs, good intention, and trying to do the best thing. And all we can do is try and help. We're not in the room all the time. We're not at the table all the time. We're not, but we try our best. I'm telling you what I'm thinking about right now in terms of the kind of people that I'm looking to recruit, and the kind of people that I need are highly skilled, issues management, understand media relations because of where we are right now. It's going to be very, very tough, and it's very limited to this area that I can hire. I wish I could hire more people. The work we have is overwhelming. People want to say, can you have more? You can't. You're hearing business is down. It's very tough right now for agencies, for recruiting. It's very, very difficult. So we're trying to make the best that we can do right now with what we have, sticking to our guns. One last thing I was going to say, and also if we have a chance, this is something I'm sure Jerry would enjoy seeing, but we worked when the economy was sort of melting down. We knew that we were going to have a tough year. And so we worked on sort of a grid of what are the metrics and how do we show the value. And we went to the 5 areas that we have to prove that we're worth our money. What is our return on investment? And that's really around how do we contribute to business growth? I mentioned this drug, DMAP. How do we, great place to work? This is a huge thing right now. We saw in the reputation research. We have an unbelievable climate and culture in Amgen. And that is an asset to us inside and outside. So great place to work, reputation, and risk management. How are we looking around the corner to see what's coming? We're not going to get it all. But can we be prepared for those risks that come? And they're all coming right now. So it's a tough time. I'm really happy to have some fantastic work, done by agencies and recruiting agencies and agencies like Marjorie to help us out. It's tough. We got to recover our reputation. It's going to take quite a long time. And there are a myriad of challenges in front of us in the corporate world right now. And we're planning and we're doing our best to face it.
As Ernie said in setting up the panel or the evening, one of the things that we would like to do as a school is to think that there's a role for academics also to help to make that case and to study those things, and that's of course part of what Jerry and his team try to do. Maybe when we come back later we can talk more about being in the room, because I think it's ultimately one of the hugely important questions, and it's not just your being in the room, it's convincing corporate leaders that the communications and public relations people need to be in that room. Don.
Thank you. I am the last guy between you and Q&A. And it reminds me of, I was at Microsoft about 3 months ago. We did a search, we just actually finished it, for their head of communications, their chief communications officer. And the job reports to a woman who's the chief marketing officer. Her name's Mitch Matthews. She's a extremely bright Brit and very tough. And I asked her, what do you look for in the person that works for you? Sort of what style works with you, what presses your buttons? And she thought about it and she said, and pardon my British accent, she said, well, I look for 3 things. I want you to be smart, be brief, and be gone. So I'm going to attempt to do that this evening. I'm one of these guys who divides the world into 2 buckets. So I'm going to talk short-term and long-term. From a job perspective in communications and I have a corporate job at Korn Ferry, but I also recruit in the communications sector, and we have probably the biggest recruiting force in that sector, especially at the senior level. I would describe the short term as horrific. You could call it catastrophic. It's bad. So there's a new term now called mass layoff events, which is considered a one-time event where 50 or more positions are eliminated. In the fourth quarter, final quarter of 2008, there were 3,100 mass layoff events, which was about 500,000 jobs. In January, there were 2,000 mass layoff events, which was 240,000 jobs. So it's going to be worse this quarter than it was last quarter. The short term is bad. It will get better. So in the short term, sort of here's my observations from a recruitment firm point of view. If you have a job, keep it. Even if you hate your job, unless you're financially independent, adopt a Zen attitude and figure out how to coexist with your lousy job. If you're looking for a job, don't be picky. I've had people in my office say, I'm worried that it's not going to look right on my resume, and don't worry about that. Get something that will pay the bill, that keeps income going in, that keeps you engaged, and when the market picks up, and it will, there will be lots of opportunity out there, and no one will hold it against you. So now's not the time to start bickering. Third, one of the bright spots is there is freelance work out there. This is a classic corporate move. We downsize, we eliminate the jobs, but then the work has to get done. And most of the companies I've worked for actually hire the people they just laid off on a contract basis.
You're supposed to do that.
So if there's freelance work out there, take it. A, it keeps income coming in. B, it keeps you out in the marketplace. And C, it usually leads to full-time work. When the market returns, you're engaged already in the corporation. And finally, I say this in good times and bad, which is network like crazy. It is the way people get jobs. More so than hiring Korn Ferry. You're more likely to get a job through friends and people that you met and the informal network you have. So short term, grim but survivable, and just be realistic about it. Long term, I'm going to echo exactly what Paul said. It's funny, I actually had written down the phrase golden age of public relations, and it's here in type, so I didn't write it in. I agree with him. We are, as soon as we get out of this thing, the next 20 years I think will be phenomenal for this profession. And a lot of what I had sort of thought about, Paul encapsulated. I see three major trends, and I see it at the most senior level in corporations when we recruit, as to why. One, Paul talked about this, messages no longer can be controlled. They just simply can't. And that was the domain of advertising. I worked for Nissan. I was their head of CorpCom for 8 years. We spent $500 or $600 million a year on advertising because you could control the message, you could place it exactly where you wanted, and it was far and away the most effective and efficient way to get out what you needed to get out. Not true anymore. Secondly, when I went to journalism school, there was all this talk about gatekeepers, pyramids of influence, and who you had to get your message out. Well, now, messages can get delivered to anyone at any time by anyone. So it's just sort of the whole distribution channel and accessing of information has been blown up. And that has profound impact I'll talk about in a sec. Finally, Paul said this too, everything's digital now. The interesting thing about that is that everything lasts forever. So poor Michael Phelps, for the rest of his life, when you Google him, you get a shot of him with a bong. You can't get rid of it. I think about Sarah Palin, and I try not to. But she gave 3 really bad media interviews. But those got emailed everywhere. They got played over and over on a 24/7 news cycle. They got dissected by every talk show, and she was destroyed. Once it's out there, and it doesn't go away. That's a whole new reality for corporations. And so the implication is huge for what we do because, and Paul said this, it's right on. Everything your brand does, your service does, your people do, your corporation does, that's what communicates. It's the behavior that communicates. And the communications implications have to be thought through for everything. It's this transparency issue, and that is our core skill. So if we can learn to apply that, I think the communications function is now as strategic as the financial or the strategic planning or marketing. In fact, perhaps even more so, and that agencies really should be right up there with the McKinseys and the Bains, because when decisions get made, you do have to think through, is it stupid to fly in the corporate jet?
Right.
Someone's got to be thinking about that. So I'm basically in violent agreement with Paul and with everybody else here that the future is absolutely great. I have two boys, 17 and 19. 10 years ago, I don't think I would have told them to go into PR. I would love it if they did now. And so,
You know, as Paul was talking, I was thinking about a phrase that I've used often in describing public relations to people who don't think about it that much. You mentioned before, maybe it doesn't have the best reputation. But one way I think of it is that it's actually the chief ethics officer in a corporation. It's the only person who has the portfolio that really, that everybody would want somebody to be doing. And if you think of PR that way, I think it elevates the whole perspective of it. But let me, now before we just open to the rest of the panel, how do we make it this golden age? How does it become this golden age? Obviously, Margie's talking about she's working with the Council of Public Relations, which is working in this. You're working directly with corporations, advising them on what kind of people to hire. In your colloquies with them, in your conversations with them, is there a growing understanding of the importance of the role of public relations and communications officers, or are they just looking to fill a slot that was there?
It hasn't hit yet. I think we're right on the cusp. Some enlightened corporations have, but a lot of them still see the function the same way. I think actually, listening to Paul, I had a little bit of a light bulb go off. I don't think we, particularly we meaning the senior people in this field, I think we're too entrenched in the old way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we know the heads of communications is the big three. They're brilliant people.
They are.
Right.
They are.
But they also fly that corporate jet all the time.
Mm-hmm.
They live in that world. They're part of the secret club. They don't get it. And it's important for us to sort of get out of our skin and live in that online world.
I think people become immunized,
Right.
you know, and you lose your edge.
Right.
And I think that's really
But-
very difficult.
Right. But that's why you have outside counselors as well,
Hopefully, right.
because of the danger. I want to respond to two quick things. First of all, you know, listening to Phyllis made me realize that I had been unnecessarily harsh about corporate people in the seat at the table, but because clearly her point that you can't in fact be in every room for every decision is true. But here's what I believe about the corporate communications job. By the way, hate the term corporate communications. Love the term public relations. Hate the term corporate communications. There are two primary responsibilities for a senior corporate communications person, and most your clients are not going to see it this way, I suspect. Most corporate communications people I deal with are very good at one of them and forget about the second. The one that they're very good at, most of them, is counseling the CEO. When and the leadership team of the organization, when they are called upon to counsel the CEO, the advice that they give is generally good public relations advice, as you would expect. But there's a second job, it seems to me, because we're living in this incredibly transparent universe, and we are living in an environment in which one well-placed idiot in your organization, sometimes at the lowest level of the organization, can, in 30 seconds, undo all the reputation-building work that you've done over a 20-year period. Some stupid person who says some stupid thing to a customer that makes it onto the front page of the newspaper. You know, somebody at Denny's 10, 15 years ago who refuses to serve a black customer, who is a waitress earning minimum wage, can destroy the reputation of your organization. And so the second thing that the senior public relations person has to do, it seems to me, is make a reality the old cliche that everybody who works in this company is part of the public relations department. The reality is that everybody who works for your organization has the organization's reputation in their hands all the time. Every time they interact with another employee, with a customer, with the community, they have the potential to, and they need to understand the public relations implications of their actions.
Well, I would like, if I could tell a story, I'll pick up on Paul. Karen White's here, who works with me in Amgen. She's right there. And she controls that Great Place to Work. And what you're talking about, we had an instance of that. If I can tell a funny story, because it actually relates to what Don just said about us being entrenched. You know, I've been doing this for 30 years. So, you know, you have to kind of learn things new. The last ending Sunday, we had the Amgen Tour of California, the cycling race, you know, and Lance Armstrong come back. He's always twittering, you know. So I read about it. So I actually was looking at it because they stole his bike and they got it back and he twittered and all this stuff. So, but one of the negative things, it's a very positive thing that we do with the race because we couple it with this breakaway from cancer effort. And we had cancer patients and we just had some fantastic stories and unbelievable emotional stories where cancer patients were there. And we've had this program for quite a few years. And a guy on CNBC criticized it because Amgen, we make Epogen, which is something that's been used for doping. And so there was a criticism of our sponsorship. And we use our sponsorship as a platform for the proper use of our medicines. But it was criticized at CNBC and the blog. And the people who came to defend us were as Paul said, were one of our employees saying, are you crazy? Amgen's doing this because we're helping cancer patients. We have this effort. And they defended it. We never even called. And then an investor came in and knew about it and defended us. So that's this thing about social media that became so real to me recently, and you're right. I mean, we don't spend as much time in it. I actually kind of got in it a little bit recently, and it's powerful. And we had our own defense from someone who understood our message.
Yeah.
You know what was interesting? You were saying that the chief communications officer needs to be kind of the
ethics officer.
The ethics officer. I would say it a little differently. I think it's the values officer. I know that it's the other side of it, but ethics to me is like enforcement. I think that the reason you have the response you do is you create a culture, and I think it's the culture that that's really a responsibility of the CEO. But I think through the communications function, if you can do that internally, it's your best defense against transparency and all of this, because everybody's a believer. Right. And I think that's a very overlooked and undervalued part of this profession that's becoming more and more important as we have open architecture and as you have people blogging from work and as you're encouraging this interaction. And I think that's something that's very important.
I brought ours with.
In a minute, let me say that. In a minute, we're going to be turning to the audience. Are there people with microphones, Jerry, who are going to be going around to the audience?
Mic over there.
So if you want to start to line up the mics as Paul's starting to talk, we'll have people with mics.
I was actually just going to throw something provocative, surprise, into the audience in response to what Marjorie and was saying about the role of PR and ethics. And here's my theory. If you have good public relations, you don't need ethics. And I don't mean good public relations in the sense that you can spin or communicate away issues. What I mean is, if you're doing public relations the way public relations should be done, then every time you make a decision, you are taking into account how your publics are going to react to that decision. And so if you know your publics will react negatively to that decision, you make a different decision. If you're doing public relations right, it is by definition ethical. Because, and you don't need to spend a lot of time thinking about ethics, because actually what you think about is how are all of my stakeholders going to be affected by this? And if they're going to be negatively affected by them, how do I ameliorate that? And that to me is public relations. And so I'm really uncomfortable with the idea of the public relations person as a conscience of the corporation, because I think the only thing my conscience does is nag, and if you become an institutional nag, you're in a really bad place.
Well, that may not, ethics officer may not be the right word, values officer might not
I like
be the right
values.
word. But the thing is, it's the person who thinks about those things.
Right.
And that's not the way often that public relations is thought about. So,
Well, it's also not the way it's practiced.
and often not the way it's practiced.
I mean, often.
You know,
It's the way we try to practice
I was
it.
going to throw one other thing out when you asked me about how you justify the value, because something else came to mind that maybe would be interesting to people. One of the things that I've told our people is that, this is the time to be as proactive as possible. Come up with ideas that are out-of-the-box thinking for your clients, where you're demonstrating value, because as people make decisions, the things with the higher value proposition are going to be the last to go, theoretically anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things is that, with all the changes going on, there are opportunities that typical marketing people wouldn't think about, because they don't really market to government. They market, you have B2B, you have B2C. Well, I'm talking about maybe we should have B2G as a new practice area for what we're doing, because there's a lot of money floating around in the G space, in the government space. So we came up with this idea with regard to a client that is moving into solar. And we were able to work with them. They resisted this at first, but we convinced them that to give us a chance to look at the stimulus program for solar tax credits. And we just saved them hundreds of millions of dollars in the new stimulus bill. So instead of maybe being cut back on what we were doing, we're now being given a very new mandate. And I think this is the time to be really creative and to think outside the box. And I think if I could leave something with the people, who are entering the profession, it's about not losing your edge in that sense too. That don't put a box around the public relations. Think about it as kind of, even in our corporate mission statement, it says pushing the boundaries of communication as part of it. And I think, that's one way to demonstrate value, is that, is that kind of thing.
We have people who are entering the profession. Josh?
First of all, thanks for having this event. My name is Joshua Sharp, and I'm a senior majoring in communication with a focus on political public relations. But I wanted to ask about Facebook, which, as you probably know, has had a few of PR challenges. But most recently, it changed its terms of service, and that gave the impression that they were going to have full ownership rights over every user's content forever. And so they rescinded those to the former terms of service. But today I noticed that they put out a blog post about it, basically saying that they were going to democratize the governance of Facebook. And while they wanted to maintain control over site redesigns and things like that, other changes into how content was controlled and things like that they would actually let users vote on changes, have advance notice and things like that. So it really is the empowered consumer. And so I wanted to see if any of you had a perspective on the public relations implications of that for social networking sites and online presence for other companies. Thank you.
Well, it's very interesting, because on the way out here today, my seatmate was the person in charge of all of that for MySpace. And we had this very interesting discussion on exactly this topic, not on Facebook necessarily, but where's the balance between responsibility to your to society and freedom to operate? And how responsible should Facebook be for having sex offenders on the site, or how democratized can it be vis-a-vis some of the responsibility it has? And I think that we're going to see, government always lags behind technology and its regulation. We elect people who mostly are lawyers. They haven't had this much experience. This is a whole new area. And I've worked on this edge of stuff for a long time. And I think that while maybe this whole new medium is really going to challenge the whole framework and this whole definition between business and responsibility in society. And I think government's going to, and I agree with Paul, government never does this very well. But it unfortunately probably take an incident or two, and things will change again. So I don't know if that answers your question at all, but I think that there's I think that this whole democratization of consumer empowerment is a great thing, but in certain venues, I think it creates some real difficult decisions for us as a society.
Paul?
So, I mean, I thought the interesting thing about it, frankly, was, and you know, this has to be a great comfort to those of us who are sort of old media types, is that even the guys who are leading the charge into this incredibly exciting new world don't actually get it all the time. I mean, that you can be, you know, that you can be running an organization like Facebook and make a sort of General Motors mistake is kind of an interesting lesson in itself. But I suspect that, you know, over the next few years, all companies are going to have to come to terms with the degree in which they want to get into crowdsourcing and using their consumers as sort of product testers and product developers and policy testers and policy developers. And clearly the answer is not going to be the same for everybody. In a highly regulated business such as the one that Phyllis operates in, for example, you know, that everybody is very sensibly being incredibly cautious about it. What it means for public relations people, I think, is, you know, I think one of the changes that's happened in public relations already over the last few years is that it has been transformed from a business that was primarily about controlling the flow of information, which is no longer, I mean, you know, that's just a silly thing to try to do. I mean, it's just not going to happen. Sorry, that world has passed us by, and the idea that we can control information as it yearns to be free is vestigial thinking, and we should jettison it. But it's, so the really interesting challenge now is making sure that the information gets put in context. And one of the interesting things, I'm going to go all over the place here if I'm not careful. One of the interesting things about Obama, to me, is that he demonstrated a few days ago, and with a perfect contrast to make the point even better than it would have been made as a standalone speech, that you can, in fact, go out and talk to Americans like adults, and you can explain complicated issues to them, you know, using words of more than one syllable, and that they will not actually sort of react hysterically. The media will. The media are the last infantilized class in America. They're going to react like 5-year-old children, whatever you do. So ignore them. But you can, in fact, go over their heads to the general population. The general population will react like adults. I had fascinating conversations with people in Europe about Obama during the election, and people in Europe couldn't believe that America was going to elect a black man. I mean, the number of people in London or Germany or Sweden who said to me, but of course Americans will never elect a black president. I said, that doesn't worry me much. Wait a little bit, you know, but it doesn't worry me much. My worry is that Americans won't elect a grown-up president. Well, they did. And you know, what this says to me is that you can, in fact, whether you're a politician or a corporation, go out to Americans and give them the facts and explain what you believe to be the logical conclusion from those facts and the best course of action, and then allow them to make up their own minds. And I think the challenge for public relations people is going to be engaging with those groups in such a way that you influence their decision without manipulating it or somehow obscuring it. But it's a very different world than the one we've lived in until now.
Mikhail?
Hi, my name is Nikhil McClendon, and I'm a first-year graduate student in the Strategic PR Master's Program. And I'm going to ask one of the classic student questions, which is, there are many of us who are about to leave the comfort of graduate school in the next few months or 9 months or a year. And I'm wondering if you have any advice for those of us who are going to be looking for entry-level positions coming up very soon, and what we can do to get one of those precious few.
Well, I think one of the things you have to do right away, anybody who's in school right now, if you don't have internships or some volunteer, go to nonprofits. They're going to be hurting a lot. I also have philanthropy as my responsibility, and I think they're going to be hurting a lot. Keep that experience. Like Don was saying, I thought he gave good advice about, you know, not being picky. Keep yourself connected to your profession, whether you're doing it through an internship, paid, unpaid. Keep doing that so that when you come out, that you have things that you can show and you have experience. I really look at those. I mean, entry-level jobs are going to be hard, but make sure you're making yourself as marketable and as competitive as you possibly can do in this environment. So you have an advantage. You go to a great school. You know, if you go to great school, and we know you're getting a great education, but make yourself stand out.
I think I already gave you my card, right? Yes. I think that one of the other things, and this isn't just for a down economy, one of the things that has helped me in life a lot is whatever job you have, knock the socks off of that job. Don't worry about where it's taking you. Just do the very best you can, and you'll get noticed and be indispensable. You know, my first job, that kind of on a career path, was something I really wanted to do, and the company didn't have any money to pay me, the organization. And I said, you know what? If this works, I'll give you a money back guarantee. You don't pay me unless it works. And I struggled through it. I needed the money, but you know, in a very short time, I ended up not only having a permanent job, but running a whole piece of something. I was 23 at the time, and I just think that, you know, you have to take this, you know, network like crazy. And one of the things that I think you'll find too, I get a lot of people who would come to me that even if we have a hiring freeze or we're not hiring, I mean, you definitely would talk to somebody and just say, you know, we don't have anything right now. So I would go around and just find out, tell people you just want to talk to them about, you're not even looking for the job, you're just trying to learn as much about what they do. And when you network like that, inevitably something happens, because I think we'll all agree that this kind of work is serendipitous in a lot of ways, and you know, it's feast and famine, well, at least from an agency side, that you, one day, you don't think you have any jobs and something happens the next day and you're looking for 5 good people. So be on people's radar screen, and just, you know, it'll take a little work. And I think the internship thing is very important, and if you don't have something lined up, then find a good internship for over the summer, because by then things will change anyway, and you'll be able to network from the inside instead of from the outside.
Don, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, relentlessly pursue every opening, and by opening I mean every lead. Don't be shy. So when your mother says, you know, your cousin Bruce is married to someone who's in HR at Amgen, and you go, oh God, Mom, do it. Follow up with cousin Bruce. My first job was at Reuter and Finn, and I was at NYU, and my mom said, you know, your sister was best friends with Abby Reuter. That's Bill Reuter's daughter. And I was like, right, Mom. She forced me. I wrote him a letter. I did get hired, and I later found in my personnel file my letter to Bill Reuter with a little note on it to the head of HR. He's a good kid, you know, I know his daughter or his sister, please see him. So I don't know if that got me the job or not, but it was like living proof that my mom was right. So
Don't you hate that?
Yeah. But don't be shy. I mean, it is, to both Phyllis's and Marjorie's point, successful people love to help younger people out. So take advantage of that. You're not being a pain, you're not being pestering, and if you are, they'll tell you. Or they won't see you, but it's worth pursuing.
You know, one other thing to do, and this will date me, but when my first job, well, first corporate job, came out of a newspaper, so now it's all electronic. But the thing that you can do, when you see that job description, look at it word for word and take the qualities that you have and match it to that characteristic. Because a lot of people don't do that, and because they'll read it and go, wow, this person really looked at what I was asking for and matched their experience to each of those things. Because there's so many mistakes that come in.
Right. I was just going to say that. No typos.
No typos.
No grammatical mistakes. You're in a profession where people are looking at your writing.
Right.
You can't believe how many resumes that we get that are just not only unprofessional, but things are spelled wrong. And, you know, they just get tossed because who wants to start with somebody who doesn't have enough pride in themselves that they don't have a good product?
Well, if you have a pile of, you know, 100 resumes to go through, you actually are looking for an excuse to throw them away, so
5
you don't
seconds.
have to. So
Five
you can
seconds.
narrow the list down. So
5
you know,
seconds.
for me, it was anybody who dotted their I's with a heart. You know. But
Okay, we're taking 2 last quick questions, and then we're.
Suggestion as well. We're all living in personal fishbowls now. So clean up your MySpace.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, no kidding.
Definitely.
Your Facebook.
Your Facebook.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And join the old fogey network on LinkedIn. It is a terrific resource. We use it all the time.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Two last quick questions.
Thanks. My name's Nicole Jordan, and I spent a number of years agency, Edelman, now I'm corporate. And I'm also a PR blogger. And one of the things that I've seen is the biggest detriment for PR people right now for this transition we're going through, that a lot of them are completely ill-equipped to usher us into the golden age, is they don't have a holistic understanding of business. They don't understand, I mean, the PR box, you know, we're taught it, I was a J major, but they don't understand, you know, they just don't understand the holistic view of recommendations of, you know, the customer relations department, the business development, the engineering, how all of that can shape very, very smart PR recommendations and strategies that will get you the seat at the table. And when we're not doing that, then it's hard to convince people and CEOs of the value. So my question is, what are we doing as an industry to train these people, to train the people who are in it? What is USC doing? So are your programs, I'm sorry I'm not as familiar, but you know, people studying PR, are they also taking classes in marketing and sociology and all these different things?
This is great because it gives me an opportunity to make Jerry regret inviting me here. And everybody else. Okay, so here's the deal. In the best of all possible worlds, this course as it is currently constructed wouldn't exist because if public relations is going to be taken seriously, at some point it has to get out of journalism schools and into business schools. And I'm sorry, but I believe that wholeheartedly. And I'll tell you why. The least important reason is because public relations people need to understand business a lot more than they need to understand journalism. Because journalism, frankly, not that interesting in the future, if it continues to exist at all. I've never had a CEO say to me, the problem with my PR people is that they don't understand the media. I have had 100 CEOs say to me, the problem with my PR people is that they just don't understand business. And we have to address that. But that actually is not the most important part of it. The most important part of it is that as long as public relations people understand, as public relations continues to be taught in journalism schools, tomorrow's CEOs are not going to get any exposure to public relations as they get their MBAs. And we have multiple generations of CEOs out there who don't actually know what public relations is and what it can do for them and don't understand it. And the reason is because it's that thing that it doesn't happen in business schools, it happens in J schools. And MBAs are not walking through the halls of J schools on a daily basis trying to figure out what public relations is. And I think it's unreasonable to expect them to. So at the risk of upsetting everybody who has been incredibly gracious to me in this environment, I really believe that PR belongs in a business school. And I'd say get an MBA before I'd say get a journalism degree and
Or have cross
Thank you, sorry.
courses. And let me just mention something from the other end of the telescope, because I sit on the board of a company, and I'm the only person like me on that board, because there's nobody with my background. They're all either CEOs or, lawyers. And one of the things that I've been doing, I'm on the board of the Kellogg, the Center for Executive Women at Kellogg, which is training women to be on corporate boards, is to try to get more boards to understand they need somebody from our profession at that level, because we're talking about the reputation of the company. And I sit around that table and I'm always raising things that nobody else has thought of. They raise things that I haven't thought of too. I mean, it's not like I'm an expert in every single thing. It's a financial services company, but I can tell you that I know that I've brought value to that board by virtue of my experience in this field. And it works both ways, and we have to find a way also to educate the companies about the values that we bring to the table.
Do either of you want to get into this topic?
Definitely want to make sure that people get their questions.
Yeah. Well, I want to have a chance to answer Paul for 1 second. Paul, a lot of what you talked about was the importance of understanding technology and understanding audiences. That's what communication schools study and teach. Business schools don't. So there may be values for business schools too, but as I heard you give your talk, I kept thinking, my God, this is what we uniquely teach at the Annenberg School, and thank God we're at the forefront of that field, and our students are being exposed to it.
Hi, good evening. My name is Charlie Gu. I'm a second-year master's student and here with SPR program. First of all, thank you for giving us this, sharing us your thoughts and insights tonight. I think me and my fellow students enjoyed very well. And I guess my question, I have a very quick question, is that I think Mr. Holmes mentioned in his early speech that PR practitioners should be and are getting hands-on various functions in a company, like marketing, research, sustainability, and design. But as we marched into other people's territories, I think it seemed that the image of public relations has been blurred. As a student with a master's degree in public relations and a practitioner soon to be, I'm just very interested to know that when we walked out of campus, how shall we brand ourselves and demonstrate our values and to sort of protect, defend our professionalism in this market, and if you guys think it's necessary. Thank you.
Anybody?
Don, do you want to?
Well, the first thing you have to do is get a job. And that's when it begins to kick in. And that's when you do put to work the tools you have, and you do take stands, and you do point out things that people didn't think about. And you have to do it in a way that also shows you understand the business implications. So I think it's a matter of, once you get into an organization, proving your value.
Right.
I think that's when it comes.
One of the interesting things about public relations compared to some of the other leading sort of organizational, professional disciplines, whatever you want to call them, is that the profession has very little institutional respect, which what I mean by that is that there are many, many individual practitioners who have respect. But if you go into an organization as a lawyer, the fact, if you're named the chief legal officer of a corporation, you have authority within that organization the moment you get the title. If you're named the senior corporate communications person in an organization, the title's only the start. You have to earn respect every day, day in, day out, by contributing to decisions, as Don said, by being very good at understanding your particular field of expertise, and at being very good at making it clear that you also understand the business as a whole. And then the moment you leave, regardless of how good you were, regardless of how critical a role you played in the success of the organization, the next person who becomes head of corporate communications starts at exactly the same place you did and has to earn it all over again. There is it's a sad truth of this profession that there is still very little institutional respect for the function. So as an individual, you have to prove day in and day out by contributing to decisions. I would say even decisions that you're not asked to contribute to. The first thing obviously is, when you're asked, make sure that the advice you give is as good as it can possibly be, as well researched, as empirical as it can possibly be. This can be a much more empirical discipline than it historically has been. Use precedent, use case histories, understand how this stuff works. One of my favorite things, I had a friend who used to hire me, because I'm a really facile writer. I'm not a very good writer, but I'm a facile writer. He used to hire me to create overnight front page stories for the New York Times. He would have me write like a 500-page story, which he would then go in and show to the CEO and say, if you make the decision you're planning to make, this is the story you should expect to read tomorrow morning. And I made quite a nice amount of money doing that for a couple of years while he was head of corp comms at a large corporation. But I guess what I'm saying is, make sure you make the decisions you're asked to make right, and then start to interject yourself even when you're not asked to, and be pushy.
I had one comment on that, because I've had such a great opportunity over my career to work with engineers, and right now we work with MDs, PhD scientists who are trying to cure cancer. So these are really, really smart people, very dedicated people. And I think the thing that you do is I would echo what Don and Paul have said about, the value. And I think sometimes what a communicator does in a company is be able to tell the story. Because when you work with people working on very complex problems, they're complex problems, right? And they're working on all these things, and what you have to do is find the story, that you can tell the story. And I think they see the value of you doing that because they're so close to everything they're doing and it's so detailed, but you help them tell the story, which helps them meet their business objective. And they appreciate your value. So you have confidence in what you do to help them. You're not them. You don't want to be them. They're not going to be you. But you can help them achieve what they need to achieve. And then, to Paul's point, you really do have to try and understand as much about their job as you can.
Marjorie, Donna, last point you want to make? I think...
You have one more.
Well, okay, you want to ask one last? But we'll make it a quick question answer. You've got a plane to catch.
Well, it's hi, I'm Jyoti, and I'm in the first year strategic PR program. So my question would be an extension of what Charlie just asked. So it's the classic question of generalist versus specialist. I mean, and I can take, in the case of like Amgen, biotech, I mean, it's like the product cycle is different, the gestation periods are long, capital intensive. And so in a case like that, I mean, how do you decide who to take? Maybe at the managerial level, are you all looking for specialists? Are you all looking for generalists? What are the kind of skill sets that you're looking at?
Oh, it's all different because, if I look at the types of people that report to me, I do have generalists. I have people who know how to do the web. I know people who do social media. I have people who specialize in media relations. I have people who specialize in philanthropy. I have people who specialize in internal communications, great writers who can do speeches or the annual report. So it's a broad range of skills. And I think, what you guys need to do is say, what are the things that you most enjoy of those things? Because some people, listen, I have some people who are great at PR, but aren't, the greatest writers in some sense. But I have a couple people who are really, really great, and I go to them all the time. So it's varied. It's very different. I know when you first start out, you kind of have to Don's point, get the job. And then you begin, use all those skills and you maybe start to specialize. You get all those experiences as you move up. But it's all different. It's true in the agency and
I would say starting out, it's fine to be a generalist and have an open mind because you'll find you might like one thing more than another. And so I think coming in and I would have as diverse an experience as I could because it also helps you be a better thinker. I find the more specialized people are, the earlier they're specialized. Sometimes it limits the way they think about things. And so I always made it a policy for our younger people that they had to work on something outside their comfort zone because it helped to give them peripheral vision. So I think it's fine. And then as you get further advanced in the profession, you might choose to specialize. But especially in the agency side, I find that our job is to take complex stuff and make it simple. Right. And sometimes if you're too involved in the subject matter, it's hard to make it simple. It's hard to make that transition.
So one final thought. In the first few years of your career, try and work on both the agency and the in-house side of the business. Because in addition to PR people generally not understanding the business, agency people sometimes don't understand what it's like to work inside a corporation. Corporate people sometimes don't understand what it's like to work inside an agency. And experiencing both in the first few years can be incredibly helpful, whichever way you decide to go later on.
One lesson for everybody. Get to know this wonderful panel, listen to what they have to say, and thank them for their wonderful participation. Thank you all. And thank you all for coming. There is a reception upstairs.
Yeah,
Yeah, why bother?